Hi there, and welcome to part one of my three-part fall dessert series. Today, we are making apple fritters. I'm from upstate New York, and if New York is known for anything, especially this time of year, it's their apples. We even have an apple festival in my hometown. So without further ado, I'm going to take you guys step by step on how to make this apple fritter recipe. Make sure you subscribe because you don't want to miss any of the fall dessert series. All right, let's start with 3/4 of a cup of warm milk. You want it to be about 100 degrees or so. I use soy milk, but you can use whatever you have in your fridge. You need also 1/8 of a cup of warm water, a half a packet of active dry yeast, which is about 1 teaspoon, 1/4 cup of sugar, half a teaspoon of salt, a half a stick or 4 tablespoons of softened butter, 1 egg at room temperature, and 2 cups of all-purpose flour. So we're going to start with our warm milk. Into that, we're going to add our 1/8 of a cup of warm water, as well as a teaspoon of our sugar. And we're adding the sugar to the milk just so the yeast have something to eat so they can do their thing. We're going to add the rest of the sugar to our dough mixture. And then go ahead and add in your yeast as well. Give that a stir so that everything is dissolved, all the yeast and all the sugar. So you're gonna let this sit for about 5 to 10 minutes until it gets foamy on top, and that's what you wanna see. If your yeast isn't foaming after 10 minutes, then your yeast might be dead and you might wanna start with a fresh packet. Okay, so moving on to our mixing bowl. In our mixing bowl, and I'm using a stand mixer, you don't have to. You can do this by hand. I'm adding our softened butter. Into the softened butter, I'm just going to mix in the remainder of our sugar and just smush it around a little bit so they're mixed together. Okay, into that, I'm then going to add the salt, and I'm just going to mix that a little bit. And then let's add an egg. Again, mostly just making sure that yolk is broken so that it incorporates easier once I add the flour. Next, add in the flour. And I'm just gonna give that a little bit of a toss, trying to mix it together by hand first. Now I'm just making a little well in the center, and I'm going to add in our yeast mixture. Once again, just mixing it a little bit to make sure all the dry ingredients are incorporated. Then I'm fitting my mixer with the hook attachment, and we're gonna let it knead in the mixer for about 5 minutes. You can do this by hand, but as you can see, after the 5 minutes, it's pretty sticky of a mixture, so that's why I use the mixer itself. All right, so go ahead and remove your dough from the mixer, and I'm just going to scrape down the sides a little bit. Now we definitely are going to let this proof, but first thing what I'm going to do is just kind of flip it over, and you can see here that there is some dry flour clumps, and I really just want to make sure that all of the dry ingredients are moistened. So once you've done that, go ahead and place a piece of parchment paper or wax paper over the top of your bowl, and then we're going to cover it with a clean tea towel or a hand towel. And then we're just going to let that proof for about an hour. If your kitchen is really warm, it'll probably be less time, about 45 minutes. If your kitchen is cold, it might be a little more time. Next up for our filling, while our dough is proofing, we can get started on this. And I am using 2 larger Honeycrisp apples. I usually like to use Honeycrisp or 20-ounce apples when I'm baking. If you're working with smaller apples, go ahead and use 3 instead. And what we're gonna do is just peel them, and we're going to take the core out. I'm using a melon baller, and I learned this trick when I was in culinary school. This makes an awesome tool for taking the core and seeds out of apples. So I highly suggest you guys get yourself one. I'll put a link down in the description of all the tools I'm using. These make a wonderful, handy tool if you're working with a lot of apples, if you make apple pies and things. Get yourself one. You won't regret it. So you're just gonna scoop it out like this or remove it with a knife safely. Same thing for the centers. We just cut them in half, and then we're gonna scoop out the centers. Now go ahead and dice up your apples. The size doesn't really matter. You don't want them to be too big, but I like a variety of sizes, honestly, because it gives it a different texture when you get the pieces of apple throughout. Now, I just want to note first thing that I've seen a lot of recipes where people like to cook their apples down. I personally find it to be an unnecessary step because I like the flavor and the texture of the apples when they're uncooked. But if you really want to cook them, go ahead and put them over low heat on the stovetop until they're soft. So then we're going to take a 1/2 cup of brown sugar, a teaspoon of cinnamon, a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. You're going to need 2 tablespoons of lemon juice and a teaspoon of vanilla extract. So go ahead and put your 2 tablespoons of lemon juice over your diced up apples. Give those a nice little toss. Then go ahead and add in the remainder of your ingredients, your spices, your brown sugar, and your vanilla. And then we're gonna mix it all together. Go ahead and put it aside. We're just gonna let these apples macerate in the sugar and spices. All right, after our dough has proofed for about an hour, it should be about double in size. I'm going to sprinkle some flour on my work surface. And I'm gonna turn out my dough onto my floured surface. We're gonna roll this out into a rectangle. Okay, just sprinkled a little extra flour on the top. And we're gonna press it out into a rectangle shape. You don't wanna push too hard because we're not trying to deflate the crap out of this thing. So gently roll it out into a rectangular shape. You want it to be about a 1/4 to a 1/4 inch thick. And we want it to be a nice rectangular surface because we're going to roll our filling up in it. Now, hopefully your apples have had at least 30 minutes to hang out. We're going to sprinkle the top of our dough with a little bit of flour. This helps absorb any extra moisture from the apples. And we're going to sprinkle our macerated apples on top. You're not going to take too much of the juice. You're going to leave the juice in the bowl, and you can save this for your icing later if you wish. Just sprinkle your apples on top of your dough just like this. All right, once you have your apples down, just sprinkle a tiny bit more of flour onto the top. Again, this will help absorb extra moisture. Now we're going to roll it up. I'm just using this bench scraper to loosen the edge a little bit. And we're going to roll it up from the long side of the rectangle, kind of like you would a cinnamon roll. So just very gently go ahead and roll it up. If your dough is sticking to the surface too much, you might not have floured it enough, or it just might be too hot in your kitchen. Either way, do your best. It doesn't have to be perfect because we're about to destroy this thing right now. Okay, so once you have this giant log of apple in dough, let's take our bench scrapers, or you can use a sharp knife, and start cutting at it diagonally. And once you've made your way to the top, go ahead and cut straight down. You're gonna probably do 2 to 3 cuts depending on how wide your log ends up being. We're just trying to cut this up into smaller, more manageable pieces. I will say this dough is very, very sticky right now. That is why I'm wearing gloves, so I don't have to worry about a huge mess on my hands, literally. Now I'm just spraying a little bit of cooking spray on either side of my parchment paper because this helps them not stick. And we're just going to grab 3 to 4 pieces just randomly throughout our log, and we're just gonna mush them together to create new little blobs. These are gonna be our fritters. So repeat that until you have approximately 12. I've decided that I'm sprinkling the top of my fritters with just a little bit more flour because they look really wet to me and I just don't want them to get soggy because of the apples. But you should be fine without it as well. Now go ahead and lay a piece of parchment or wax paper over the top once again, and our tea towel. We're going to let these sit for about another 30 to 45 minutes. In the meantime, go ahead and get your fryer oil ready. You're gonna heat your fryer oil up to 375. Don't let it drop below 350 or you're going to have a really greasy mess on your hands. Once your oil is to temperature, you can put in your fritters. As you can see, they've expanded while they've been proofing again, so now they are ready to be fried. I'm doing 3 at a time because that's all that fits. I'm just using a cast iron Dutch oven and I'm using canola oil to fry. Make sure you're not using olive oil. You don't want that flavor, as well as you want it to be an oil that can stand up to a higher temperature. So we're gonna let them fry at 375 Fahrenheit for 3 minutes on each side. And once they're done, just remove them onto a paper towel lined plate so they can drain any excess oil. Now, glazing is not an option. You have to glaze your apple fritters. So we're gonna start with a cup of sifted powdered sugar and 2 tablespoons of natural maple syrup and 1 tablespoon of milk. You might need an additional tablespoon of milk, but you really want your glaze to be super thick. So mix all that together and then you can adjust if you need a little more milk. But for it to get that beautiful white glaze, you need it to be super thick like this. Once your fritters are completely cooled off, go ahead and dunk the one side into them. And repeat with the remaining fritters. You may find that using a spoon is helpful as well, depending on how thick your glaze is. And then you can just set those aside so the glaze can solidify completely and then present. These fritters are best served immediately, but they will last for a couple of days. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to my channel. You don't want to miss out on the rest of my fall dessert series. Next week, I will be having a pumpkin streusel muffin. So make sure you're subscribed. I'll see y'all later. I love you so much. Bye.